Hi, I'm Malcom Garrett. I was introduced to Duran Duran when they first signed to EMI Records at the end of 1980, and I had the great pleasure of working with them for the next few years and was the designer for a number of their record sleeves, both singles and albums and video cassettes, for the next few years, some of which I'll be talking to you about today. I was introduced by their label manager, Rob Waugh, and would I like to meet them and design their record sleeves. New Romanticism was just kind of bubbling under. My studio was on Tottenham Court Road. I'd see Boy George wandering past all the time. Duran Duran were the big band from Birmingham. I'd been designing record sleeves in the music industry for 2 or 3 years, and so I was a bit of an old hand for this new stuff. And big signing for EMI. I had great hopes for them, or not hopes, predictions that they were going to be huge. This band was going to be the band. I knew that the origin of the name Duran Duran was from the film Barbarella, so I knew there was a kind of fantasy science fiction kind of feel to the name. With the song Planet Earth, I just had this strange idea that Duran Duran could be like a futuristic airline. And so the look of the Duran Duran lettering has a hint of Pan Am or a hint of TWA or that kind of international flavor, because it was very clear right from the start that you know, the guys had international ambitions. And so I created what for me was a fairly plain and clean and fresh palette that would allow me to go into different directions. And the logo type for me was the most important thing. If you compare this to the other singles from this album, Planet Earth, Careless Memories, Girls on Film, you'll see that the lettering varies from sleeve to sleeve, although taken together it feels like one consistent flow of lettering. We're talking about the CD here, but back in 1981, I think that's when the album came out, CDs didn't exist. So I would be working at a palette this size. So this is the proof. This is what we call a wet proof. Would be coming off the printing press. You see they've got the color bars at the bottom that allow us to check that the color is consistent across the sheet. And this allows us to make sure that everything's in place. Because they were a special band, then I could ask for special things. So I could say, can we have chrome foil? I'd established this idea of a color bar across the top of photographs and images. As a thing on Planet Earth and Careless Memories, I kind of developed a palette of graphic devices that I could use that would kind of tie the records together. And the idea that I put a colored bar across the top of every photo on every sleeve was a consistent thing from sleeve to sleeve. So whilst the singles themselves, the songs, you know, Simon's songs vary, the graphic flavor has a consistency. So you can sit all of the releases from this album side by side and they look like the same family. And that was something I was very concerned with, making sure that there was that kind of sense of familiarity from one record to another. Because of course I'm getting to know the band, but so are the audience. So my job is to give graphic tools or help to the audience to be able to spot a Duran Duran sleeve. So a Duran Duran sleeve would stand out alongside a Culture Club or a Spandau Ballet or a Visage or whomever it might be. By the time we got to Rio, the time of Rio, I'd been working with the band consistently for over a year. We moved away from that clean, clinical look of the first album and started to get a bit warmer. I started to feel a bit more confident about how the music felt. Rio was a great one to work on. It was really good. The band had contacted Patrick Nagel, who was an illustrator working on the west coast of the United States, and they really liked his work, and so they'd contacted him to see whether he had any suggestions. Patrick had painted a square picture, and he had these little parallelograms on it where the lettering sits, because he was anticipating that it would form the whole of the sleeve. I knew that there would be several singles from this album, so I knew that I needed some other graphic material that I'd want to be able to link future record sleeves and future marketing elements back to this sleeve. So I decided I would shrink the picture and have the picture wrapped round to the back. Let me show you on the full sleeve because it's easier to see. So the picture goes off there and it comes back on here. The effect of that in my head is that the listeners or the purchasers of this record would be effectively pulling the record out of the sleeve through the image. The whole idea of Rio, it's got that South American flavor, so I had this idea that I would look at packaging for cigars, for Cuban cigars, but I wanted to pick up the flavor of South American period charm to it. Here's a more obscure reference here. This parallelogram is actually cut from a much larger picture of the whole of the band. Not many people know that the full photograph of the band, which was shot from the roof of Guy's Hospital in southeast London, I used as a full double-page spread in New Sounds, New Styles, and the only hint that this was taken from it is that I keylined the parallelogram in the background on the sleeve. So real fans amongst you will track down that copy of New Sounds, New Styles that has Simon Le Bon on the cover and the photograph from which this is taken. So here's another amazing thing about this sleeve. Only until very recently, nobody was aware that this illustration is actually based on a photograph of a real person until it was revealed on Instagram. Patrick Nagel, who sadly is no longer with us, his estate revealed that they'd found a photographic reference from a magazine from back in 1981, a photograph of Marcy that Nagel used as his template for this image. But this is unmistakably a Duran Duran record sleeve. Seven and the Ragged Tiger, what a title to work with. I'll pull up the sleeve because we need to look at this in more detail. Now, I can't pretend to know what was going on in Simon's head when he came up with this concept of calling it Seven and the Ragged Tiger. So there was already an air of mystery and kind of sense of esoteric knowledge. We decided that this group of pioneers and entrepreneurs were traversing through a mystical land. And so we decided that let's create a mystical land in which to place this imagery. Now, an old school friend of mine, Keith Breeden, was working from the same studio as me in London, and Keith was a phenomenally brilliant painter. So I came back from Sydney and said, Keith, we've got to draw a map. we want a map that looks like some kind of ancient, mystical, unknown place. I kind of done an outline, and they'd done a photo session with a tiger. An actual tiger that they got from the zoo. We decided not to use the tiger itself on the record sleeve. That would be too obvious. We've always trying to find a balance between something that was direct and obvious, but yet it wasn't. It has no origin. I mean, again, I like things to have some kind of sense of familiarity, but not a sense of obviousness. This lettering is very Art Deco, but the sleeve itself is not Art Deco. This double D logo, which went on to become their logo, I'd drawn up for a standalone single. Is there something I should know? So that was my brief to Keith. Keith, we need a map. Here's roughly the space it's got to fit. What can you do? So I think Keith painted this over the weekend. And it has this grid system on it with these little symbols which have their origins in runes. Now, I've been asked many, many, many times, what do all these symbols mean? And of course, they mean Seven and the Ragged Tiger. They don't mean anything. They mean that there's some sense of mystery which is being explored in some of the lyric writing and the tone of the music within the album. So the next in the sequence is Notorious. This has an interesting personal story to me because after Seven and the Ragged Tiger, it had been an intense 2 or 3 years for the band. They'd toured the world. They were, I guess, a little bit exhausted, as bands would do. You know, they got 3 albums, all increasing levels of success, and so they decided to take some time apart from Duran Duran. And then it came time for the band to come back together and be Duran Duran again. So, of course, the 5 guys got together, sat in the room, had a house meeting, and decided a fresh start was what was needed. I knew that they were already planning an album called Notorious, but they decided at this fresh start they'd part companies with Paul and Michael Barrow, their managers, and sadly for me, they'd start part company with me. Temporarily, as it turned out, because they just wanted everything to be new, everything to be fresh, and so that they'd have a new burst of energy with no, as they saw it, no baggage from the past. Now, as I say, I knew the album was going to be called Notorious because I designed a logo for Notorious. But sadly for me, that was as far as I got with Notorious. So I can talk about the sleeve a little bit because there was an overlap. Notorious, of course, was the title of a famous film by Alfred Hitchcock, and what was interesting about Hitchcock is the things you don't see, or the mysterious elements. So I think it was John had come up with this idea for this photograph, which had the band on the front, but it wrapped round to the back, and there was a mysterious girl on the back. And I think this is one of their best sleeves. Actually, it has a nice power, a mystery, and an elegance to it. And I think there was a change of musical direction. I mean, that's one of the great things about Duran Duran, something I always admired them for, is they were always progressing musically, always trying new stuff. So I like this, but sadly, it's not one of mine. So moving on to Big Thing. I've got to say, this is another Duran Duran record sleeve I wished I'd done. Those of you who know my work know that my work is quite often very graphic, if you like. It's very typographic, it's very hard-edged with bright colours, and this has all of the components that appeal to me. The designer, Hans Arnold, has done this great thing where there isn't actually a letter I in either Big or Thing, but you don't see that, you just read it as Big Thing. He's basically divided the front of the sleeve and the back of the sleeve into 4 areas with the letter I's between them. It's just very clever, very simple, very clever, very bold. And I always thought it would be great to animate, because you can see these squares changing size and scale, yet all the time still reading as Big Thing. So yeah, I love this sleeve. Thank you very much for listening. This has been a real pleasure for me, going back in time and talking about the great times I had working with Duran Duran, and hopefully creating some timeless sleeves. Well, I guess they're timeless to a point, because here we are talking about them. So thank you again for listening, and go out and buy them.